Daniel Hart stared at the small birthday cake sitting in front of him on the white tablecloth and wondered when birthdays had stopped feeling like celebrations and started feeling like reminders of everything he'd lost. 38 years old, single father of 3, widower for 2 years. The waiter had smiled sympathetically when he'd lit the candles. "Making a wish, sir?" Daniel had nodded, but he couldn't think of a single wish that didn't involve bringing back the dead. "Daddy, are you going to blow out the candles?" He looked up at Ivy, Ruby, and Pearl, his identical triplet daughters, 6 years old and dressed in their Sunday best. They'd insisted on wearing their matching pastel dresses tonight, the ones Amanda had bought them for Easter last year, the ones they'd only worn once before she died. "In a minute, sweetheart. Let me just—" But his voice caught. The restaurant suddenly felt too warm, too crowded, too full of couples and families celebrating together, while he sat here pretending that 4 people at a table wasn't supposed to be 5. "I need to use the bathroom," he managed. "I'll be right back. Stay in your seats." He didn't wait for them to answer. He just stood and walked away before they could see their father fall apart on his own birthday. In the bathroom, Daniel gripped the sink and forced himself to breathe. 2 years. It had been 2 years since Amanda's heart had simply stopped in the middle of the night. No warning, no goodbye, just there one moment and gone the next. Before we continue, please tell us where in the world are you tuning in from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. And now he was celebrating his birthday in a restaurant he couldn't really afford, with 3 little girls who were trying so hard to make him smile when they were grieving just as much as he was. Pull it together, he told himself. They need you to be strong. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother. "Happy birthday, honey. Amanda would be so proud of how you're holding it together for the girls." Holding it together. Was that what he was doing? When Daniel finally returned to the table, forcing a smile he didn't feel, something had changed. The girls weren't sitting at their table anymore. His heart stopped. Girls? Where? Then he saw them. Across the restaurant, standing beside another table, clustered together like 3 small flowers in matching dresses. And they were talking to a woman in a red dress. Daniel's feet moved automatically, carrying him across the restaurant even as his mind raced with apologies he'd need to make to whatever stranger his daughters were bothering. But as he got closer, he heard Ivy's small voice, clear and earnest. "Our daddy's birthday is today, but he's really sad because our mommy died, and we thought maybe if you could pretend to be our mommy just for tonight." Ruby continued, her hands clasped together like she was praying, "just so he doesn't have to be alone on his birthday." "We'll be really good," Pearl added quickly. "We won't ask for dessert or anything. We just want Daddy to be happy." Daniel stopped dead in his tracks. The woman they were talking to was young, late 20s maybe, with long blonde hair and the kind of beauty that belonged on magazine covers, not in family restaurants. Her elegant red dress suggested she was here for something important, maybe a date or a business dinner. And his 3 6-year-old daughters had just asked her to pretend to be their dead mother. "Girls," Daniel said, his voice strangled with embarrassment and heartbreak. "I'm so sorry. They shouldn't have." But the woman wasn't looking at him. She was looking at his daughters, and there were tears streaming down her perfect face. "Yes," she said softly. "Yes, I'll pretend." The restaurant seemed to hold its breath. "You what?" Daniel managed. The woman stood, and up close she was even more striking. But it was her eyes that caught him, warm and kind and filled with a pain he recognized because he saw it in his own mirror every morning. "I'll pretend to be your mom tonight," she said to the girls, her voice steady despite the tears. "If your daddy says it's okay." 3 pairs of hopeful eyes turned to Daniel. He should say no. He should apologize again and take his daughters back to their table and explain why asking strangers to play pretend was inappropriate. But looking at the woman's face, at the genuine compassion there, at his daughter's desperate hope that tonight could be normal just for a few hours. "Okay," he heard himself say. "Okay." The woman smiled, and it transformed her face from beautiful to luminous. "I'm Victoria. Victoria Sinclair, Daniel Hart, and these are Ivy, Ruby, and Pearl. It's very nice to meet you all. Victoria knelt down to the girls' level, taking their small hands in hers. Now, why don't we go back to your table and celebrate your daddy's birthday properly? As they walked back across the restaurant, Victoria's hand in Pearl's, Daniel carrying Ivy, while Ruby held his other hand, he couldn't help but wonder what twist of fate had brought this elegant stranger into their lives at exactly the moment they needed her most. He didn't know that Victoria had her own reasons for saying yes, that she'd been sitting alone at that table trying to work up the courage to leave her own painful past behind, that 3 little girls asking her to be their mother for one night would change the trajectory of all their lives. All he knew was that when they reached the table and Victoria slid into the empty chair, Amanda's chair, and smiled at him across the birthday cakes, flickering candles, something inside his chest that had been frozen for 2 years began, very slowly, to thaw. "Make a wish, Daddy," Ivy said, and for the first time in 2 years, Daniel closed his eyes and wished for something other than the past. He wished for the courage to imagine a future. The dinner that followed was the strangest and most wonderful evening Daniel had experienced since Amanda's death. Victoria played her role perfectly, not trying to replace Amanda, but simply being present. She asked the girls about school, admired the drawings they pulled from their little purses, and laughed at their jokes with genuine delight. "So you're all in first grade?" Victoria asked, cutting her salmon into delicate pieces. "Yes," Ruby said proudly. "We're in Mrs. Patterson's class." "And we sit together," Ivy added, "because we're triplets, so we have to stay close." "That's not actually a rule," Pearl corrected, "but we like it better." "I can imagine," Victoria said warmly. "Having 2 built-in best friends must be wonderful." "Do you have any sisters?" Ruby asked. Victoria's smile faltered for just a second. "I had a sister. She passed away when we were young." The table went quiet. Daniel watched his daughters process this information with the peculiar wisdom children sometimes possessed. "Is that why you said yes?" Ivy asked softly, "When we asked you to pretend, because you know what it's like to miss someone." Victoria's eyes glistened. "Yes, sweetheart. That's exactly why." Daniel felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't just a kind stranger doing a good deed. This was someone who understood their pain from the inside out. "How old were you?" he found himself asking. 12. She was 10. Leukemia. Victoria took a sip of her wine. "It's been 17 years, but there are still days when I reach for the phone to call her before I remember she's gone." "Daddy does that with Mommy," Pearl said. "Sometimes he forgets and sets for places at the table." Daniel's throat tightened. He hadn't realized the girls had noticed. "That's not forgetting," Victoria said gently. "That's love. Love doesn't stop just because someone isn't here anymore." The girls nodded solemnly, and Daniel found himself grateful beyond words for this stranger who seemed to know exactly what to say. When the waiter brought the check, Victoria reached for it. "Please," Daniel protested. "You've already done so much." "It's your birthday," Victoria interrupted firmly, "and these 3 beautiful girls asked me to be their mother for the evening. Do you know how many mothers pay for their children's birthday dinners?" "All of them," Ivy, Ruby, and Pearl said in unison. Victoria grinned. "Exactly. So I'm paying, and that's final." Daniel wanted to argue, but something in her expression told him this mattered to her, that being able to do this one small thing was important. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for everything. You have no idea what this meant to us." "I think I have some idea." Victoria's smile was soft. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. The girls said you were alone, but surely you have family? Friends?" Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "My mother offered to come. My brother wanted to fly in from Seattle, but I told him no. I thought—" He paused, trying to find the right words. "I thought if I just pushed through it, if I treated it like any other day, it would hurt less. I was wrong." "Grief doesn't work that way," Victoria said. "Pretending the hard days aren't hard just makes them harder." Is that from experience? Every year on my sister's birthday, I used to force myself to go to work, to act normal, to pretend it wasn't destroying me. Victoria's voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed her pain. It took me years to learn that it's okay to acknowledge the days that hurt, that honoring the pain is sometimes the only way through it. They left the restaurant an hour later, stepping out into the cool evening air. The girls were exhausted, leaning against Daniel as they walked to the parking lot. "Thank you again," Daniel said as they reached his car. "I know this was probably the strangest dinner you've ever had." "Actually," Victoria said, "it was exactly what I needed tonight." "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "I was supposed to be having dinner with my fiancé tonight. Ex-fiancé, as of 3 days ago. He was supposed to meet me here to discuss dividing our things, but he texted an hour before to say he wasn't coming. Too painful, apparently." Daniel's eyes widened. "Victoria, I'm so sorry. We completely monopolized your evening when you were dealing with—" "No," she interrupted. "You saved my evening. I was sitting at that table feeling sorry for myself, wondering how I'd ended up 30 years old and alone again. And then 3 little girls reminded me that loneliness is a choice we make, not a sentence we serve." "I'm not sure I follow. You could have said no when they asked. You could have been embarrassed or angry or told me to mind my own business. But you said yes. You let a stranger into your pain because your daughters asked you to be brave." Victoria smiled. "That's not loneliness, Daniel. That's hope. And hope is a lot harder than loneliness." As Daniel drove home with 3 sleeping girls in the back seat, he thought about Victoria's words. Hope is harder than loneliness. He'd spent 2 years choosing loneliness because it was safer, more predictable. Hope required vulnerability, and he'd had enough of being vulnerable. But tonight, watching a stranger hold his daughter's hands and smile across a birthday cake, something had shifted. For the first time since Amanda died, he'd felt something other than grief. He'd felt possibility. 3 days later, Daniel was loading groceries into his car when he heard a familiar voice. "Daniel." He turned to find Victoria standing a few feet away, holding a bag from the bookstore next to the supermarket. She looked different in jeans and a sweater, more approachable somehow, though no less beautiful. "Victoria." "Hi." "Hi." She smiled, tucking a strand of blonde hair behind her ear. "This is going to sound strange, but I've been thinking about you. About the girls. How are they?" "They're good. They haven't stopped talking about you, actually. They keep asking when we're going to see our pretend mommy again." Victoria laughed. "Is that what they're calling me?" "Among other things. Ruby has decided you're a princess. Ivy thinks you're a movie star. And Pearl is convinced you're secretly a superhero. I like Pearl's theory best." They stood there in the parking lot, neither quite sure what to say next, but neither wanting to walk away. "Listen," Daniel said finally. "This is probably completely inappropriate, but would you like to have coffee sometime? Just to talk. The girls would love to see you again, and he paused. I'd like to see you again, too." Victoria's smile reached her eyes. "I'd like that very much." They exchanged numbers, and as Daniel drove away, he caught himself smiling. Actually smiling, not the forced version he'd perfected for his daughter's sake, but a real, genuine smile. Amanda would have liked Victoria, he thought. She would have appreciated someone brave enough to say yes to 3 grieving children in a restaurant. The thought didn't hurt the way he expected it to. Instead, it felt like permission. Coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into weekend outings with the girls. Victoria folded seamlessly into their lives, not as a replacement for Amanda, but as something new entirely. She taught the girls to bake, filling Daniel's kitchen with the smell of cookies and laughter. She took them to museums and parks, her own childhood cut short by grief, making her determined to give them every moment of joy she could. And slowly, carefully, Daniel fell in love with her. It wasn't the wild, all-consuming love he'd felt for Amanda at 22. This was quieter, deeper, built on shared pain and hard-won hope. It was love that knew loss and chose to love anyway. 6 months after that birthday dinner, Daniel and Victoria were putting the girls to bed when Ruby asked the question that had clearly been building for weeks. Victoria, are you going to be our real mom now? Or just our pretend mom? Daniel froze, but Victoria just smiled and sat on the edge of Ruby's bed. What do you think the difference is? She asked gently. Real moms stay forever, Ivy said. Pretend moms might leave. And our first mom had to leave, Pearl added quietly. Because she died. But we don't want you to leave. Victoria looked at Daniel, her eyes asking permission. He nodded, his throat too tight to speak. Here's what I think, Victoria said, taking each girl's hand. I think there are lots of different kinds of moms. Birth moms, adoptive moms, stepmoms, foster moms. And yes, pretend moms. But what makes a mom real isn't how she got the job. It's whether she chooses to stay. Are you choosing to stay? Ruby asked. I am. If you'll have me. If your daddy will have me. Victoria's voice shook slightly. I can't replace your first mom. She'll always be your mom, and she'll always be important. But I'd like to be your second mom. Your bonus mom. If that's okay with you. 3 small bodies launched themselves at Victoria, nearly knocking her off the bed. Over their heads, she met Daniel's eyes, and he saw his own tears reflected in hers. After the girls were asleep, Daniel and Victoria sat on the back porch, wrapped in a blanket against the evening chill. You didn't have to say yes, Daniel said. To them, to this, to all of it. I know. So why did you? Victoria was quiet for a moment. Do you remember what I told you that first night? That my sister died when I was 12. Of course. What I didn't tell you was that I blamed myself. She needed a bone marrow transplant, and I wasn't a match. I spent years thinking that if I had been a match, she'd still be alive. That I'd failed her by not being able to save her. Daniel pulled her closer. That's not how it works. You know that. I know it now. But for a long time, I carried this guilt that made me feel like I didn't deserve to be happy. Like being alive when she wasn't was a betrayal. Victoria turned to look at him, and then 3 little girls asked me to be their mother for one night, and I realized something. What? That the best way to honor the people we've lost isn't to stop living. It's to live fully, to love fiercely, to say yes to joy even when grief is still sitting in the room. Her voice broke. Your girls reminded me how to do that. They gave me permission to be happy again. And so did you. Daniel kissed her, tasting salt from tears he wasn't sure belonged to him or her or both of them together. Marry me, he said. Victoria pulled back, eyes wide. What? Marry me. Not because I'm trying to replace Amanda or because the girls need a mother. Marry me because I love you. Because you make me laugh again. Because you understand that grief and joy can exist in the same space. Because every day with you feels like choosing life instead of just surviving it. Daniel, you don't have to answer now. I know it's fast. I know it's complicated. But I need you to know that when I think about the future now, I see you in it. You and the girls and maybe more children if you want them, and definitely more birthday dinners where we're all together. Victoria was crying now, full tears streaming down her face. Yes, 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 I'll marry you. Yes to all of it. Yes to choosing life. Yes to joy and grief existing together. Yes to being their second mom and your wife. And yes to more birthday dinners. She laughed through her tears. Yes to everything. They were married 6 months later in a small ceremony in Daniel's backyard. The girls served as flower girls, wearing matching dresses and carrying bouquets of white roses, Amanda's favorite flower. A detail Victoria had insisted on. She's part of this family, Victoria had said when they were planning. She always will be. We honor that, not hide from it. During the ceremony, the officiant asked if anyone wanted to speak. Pearl raised her hand. I have something to say. The officiant smiled. Go ahead, sweetheart. Pearl turned to Victoria. On Daddy's birthday, we asked you to pretend to be our mom. But you don't have to pretend anymore, because now you're going to be our real mom, and we love you. There wasn't a dry eye in the yard. That night, After the girls were asleep and the last guests had gone home, Daniel and Victoria stood in their bedroom, still in their wedding clothes. "Do you ever think about that night?" Victoria asked. "About how easily it could have gone differently?" "All the time. You could have said no. I could have said no. The girls could have been too shy to ask. But we didn't, and they weren't." Victoria wrapped her arms around him. "Do you believe in fate?" "I didn't, but I'm starting to." "Me too, because I think those 3 little girls were supposed to find me that night. I think I was supposed to be sitting alone in that restaurant at that exact moment, so they could ask me the question I didn't know I needed to answer." "What question was that?" "Are you brave enough to love again?" Victoria smiled. "And thanks to them, I learned that yes, I am." 2 years after the wedding, Daniel woke up to the sound of running feet and whispered arguments outside his bedroom door. "You hold the tray, I'll open the door." "No, I'll hold the tray, you open the door." "Girls, just both." The door burst open and Ivy, Ruby, and Pearl tumbled in, followed by Victoria carrying a breakfast tray. "Happy birthday, Daddy," they chorused. Daniel sat up, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Is it my birthday already?" "You say that every year," Ruby informed him. "And every year we have to remind you," Pearl added. "Some things never change," Ivy finished with a grin. Victoria set the tray on the bed, pancakes, eggs, bacon, and a small chocolate cake with lit candles. "We thought we'd start a new tradition," she said, settling beside him. "Birthday breakfast in bed." "With cake," Ruby emphasized, "because cake for breakfast is the best." Daniel looked at his family, his 3 daughters now 8 years old, growing so fast it terrified him, and his wife, the woman who'd said yes to pretending and ended up making everything real, and felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Make a wish, Daddy," Ivy said, and Daniel realized he didn't need to. Every wish he'd ever made had already come true, but he closed his eyes anyway and wished for one more thing, that every person who'd ever spent a birthday alone would find their own 3 brave little girls, and their own stranger willing to say yes, because sometimes the family you need finds you in the most unexpected ways, and sometimes pretending is the first step toward something real. For years after that first birthday dinner, Daniel stood in the kitchen watching Victoria teach the girls to bake Amanda's favorite lemon cake. It was Amanda's birthday, a day that used to be unbearable, but had become something different now. A day to remember and honor, but also to celebrate. On the counter sat 2 photos in matching frames. One of Amanda, young and laughing, holding 3 newborn babies. One of Victoria, surrounded by the same 3 girls, now 10 years old and grinning at the camera. "Are you okay?" Victoria asked softly, coming to stand beside him. "Yeah," Daniel said, and meant it. "I was just thinking about how lucky I am." "We're all lucky." "No, I mean it. I lost Amanda, and it nearly destroyed me. But then you came into our lives and taught us that loss doesn't have to mean the end, that we can hold onto the past while still moving forward." Victoria leaned against him. "The girls taught me the same thing. They lost their mother, but they didn't let that loss make them afraid to love again. They asked a stranger to be their mom, and somehow I was exactly who they needed." "Do you ever think about that fiancé, the one who stood you up?" "Sometimes, mostly to be grateful that he did." Victoria smiled, "Because if he hadn't, I wouldn't have been sitting alone in that restaurant. I wouldn't have said yes to 3 little girls, and I wouldn't have found the family I was meant to have." From the kitchen table, Ruby called out, "Victoria, can we add extra lemon?" "It's your first mom's recipe," Victoria called back. "What do you think she would say?" The girls exchanged glances, then smiled. She'd say yes. She loved lemon. "Then yes it is." Daniel pulled Victoria close, breathing in the scent of lemon and vanilla and home. This was what healing looked like. Not forgetting the past, but weaving it into the present. Not replacing what was lost, but making room for what was found. That evening, they ate the lemon cake and told stories about Amanda. The girls' memories mixed with Victoria's questions, creating a tapestry of past and present. Tell the one about the hospital, Ivy said. When we were born, Pearl asked. Yeah, well, Mom thought she was only having one baby. Daniel laughed. She went in for a routine checkup at 20 weeks, and the ultrasound tech got very quiet. Then she called in the doctor, and the doctor looked at the screen and said, Well, Mrs. Hart, I have some news. And Mom said, Is the baby okay? Ruby continued, having heard this story 100 times. And the doctor said, The babies are fine. All 3 of them. Daniel shook his head at the memory. Your mother's face went completely white. She looked at me and said, We're going to need a bigger house. The girls giggled, and Victoria smiled. She sounds like she was amazing, Victoria said. She was, Daniel agreed. And you are too. Different kinds of amazing, but both exactly what this family needed. Later that night, after the girls were in bed and the house was quiet, Daniel found Victoria on the back porch, looking at the stars. Thinking about your sister, he asked. How did you know? Because I was thinking about Amanda. It's a day for remembering, isn't it? Do you think they'd be happy? Victoria asked. The people we lost. Do you think they'd approve of us finding each other? Daniel pulled her close. I think Amanda would be grateful that you love our girls. And I think your sister would be happy that you finally let yourself be happy. I hope so. I know so. Because love doesn't run out, Victoria. You taught me that. We can love the people we lost and still have room to love the people we found. They stood there under the stars, holding each other, both thinking about the people who'd shaped them and the people who'd saved them. 6 years after that first pretend dinner, the girls were 12. One evening, Ivy came home from school with an assignment. We have to write about a moment that changed our lives, she said at dinner. I'm going to write about the night we asked Victoria to be our mom. Me too, Ruby said immediately. Me 3, Pearl added. But I'm going to focus on the part where you both said yes. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. You girls don't have to. We want to, Ivy interrupted. Because it's true. That night changed everything. What are you going to say? Daniel asked. Ivy thought for a moment. I'm going to say that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for help, even from a stranger. Even when you're scared, they'll say no. And I'm going to say that love doesn't always look the way you expect it to, Ruby added. Sometimes it looks like a lady in a red dress who's brave enough to say yes. And I'm going to say that families don't have to be perfect to be real, Pearl finished. They just have to choose each other. Every single day. Daniel looked at Victoria across the table and saw his own wonder reflected in her eyes. These girls, these incredible, wise, brave girls who'd lost their mother but hadn't lost their ability to hope, who'd taken their grief and turned it into compassion, who'd asked a stranger to pretend to be their mother and somehow made it real. I love you girls, he said, his voice thick. We know, Daddy, they said in unison. We love you too. I love you girls, he said, his voice thick. We know, Daddy, they said in unison. We love you too. A week later, Victoria's phone rang while she was making dinner. An unfamiliar number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Is this Victoria Sinclair? I mean Victoria Hart. Yes, who's calling? My name is James Whitmore. I'm a journalist with the Herald. I'm working on a feature about unexpected connections, and someone forwarded me your daughter's school essay. The one about the night she and her sisters asked you to be their mother. Victoria's hand tightened on the phone. How did you get that? Her teacher submitted it to a national essay contest. It won first place in the middle school division. Mrs. Patterson thought it was too beautiful not to share. Victoria sat down heavily. Ivy won. All 3 of them did. They each wrote about the same night, from different perspectives. The judges said they'd never seen anything like it. 3 sisters, 1 moment, 3 completely unique but interconnected stories. I didn't even know they'd entered. I was hoping to interview your family, to tell the full story. I think it's something people need to hear right now, that choosing connection over fear can change everything. Victoria found Daniel in the garage, organizing tools. When she told him about the call, His expression went through several emotions: surprise, pride, concern. "Do you want to do it?" he asked. "I don't know. It feels private. That night was ours." But the girls wrote about it. They wanted to share it. With their English teacher, not the world. Daniel set down the wrench he'd been holding. What if it helps someone? What if there's another dad out there eating birthday cake alone? Or another woman sitting in a restaurant trying to decide if she's brave enough to start over? And they read our story, and it gives them hope. Victoria was quiet for a moment. "You think we should do it?" "I think we should ask the girls. It's their story too." That evening, they gathered around the dinner table, the same table where so many important conversations had happened, and Daniel explained about the journalist. "So basically," Ruby said slowly, "our homework assignment went viral?" "Not viral exactly," Victoria said, "but it won a big contest, and now people want to hear the whole story." "What would we have to do?" Ivy asked practically. "Talk to a reporter. Answer questions about that night, about what it's been like since." Pearl's eyes were bright. "Would it be in the newspaper?" "Yes, and probably online. Maybe even picked up by other papers." The girls looked at each other, having one of their silent triplet conversations. "I think we should do it," Ivy said finally. "Because Pearl was right in her essay, families choose each other. And if our story helps other people choose connection instead of loneliness, then we should share it. Even if it means strangers knowing about Mom." Daniel asked gently, "About the hard parts?" "Mom would want us to help people," Ruby said with certainty. "She always said that pain could either make you bitter or make you better. This is us choosing better." The interview happened on a Saturday afternoon. James Whitmore arrived with a photographer, and they spent 3 hours talking about Amanda, about that birthday dinner, about grief and hope, and the strange courage it takes to ask a stranger for help. The photographer wanted to recreate the moment. They went back to the same restaurant, sat at the same tables, Daniel alone with a birthday cake, the girls approaching Victoria. But this time, everyone was smiling. This time, it wasn't pretend. When the article came out 2 weeks later, it was the cover story of the Sunday magazine section. The headline read, "The Birthday Wish That Came True. How 3 girls asked a stranger to be their mother, and she said yes." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Letters poured in from widowers and widows, from children who'd lost parents, from people who'd said yes to connection when it scared them, and people who wished they'd been braver. Stories of grief and healing, of families formed in unexpected ways, of strangers who became family. One letter in particular made Victoria cry. "Dear Heart Family, I'm a single mother whose husband died 3 years ago. I've been so afraid to date, to let anyone into my children's lives, because I thought it would be betraying his memory. But reading about how you honor both mothers, how Amanda is still part of your family even as Victoria loves those girls, it gave me permission to imagine a future that includes both grief and joy. Thank you for being brave enough to share your story." Another came from a man who'd eaten his birthday dinner alone every year for 5 years after his wife passed. "I read your article and decided to try something different. I called my estranged sister, whom I'd pushed away in my grief. We had dinner together. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Your daughters reminded me that asking for connection is braver than staying alone." The girls read every letter, pinning their favorites to a bulletin board in their room. "Look at this one," Ivy said one evening. "It's from a teacher who's going to use our essays in her class to talk about different types of families." "And this one," Ruby added, "is from a little girl whose mom died. She says she's going to be brave like us when she's scared." "This is why we shared it," Pearl said softly, "to help people know they're not alone." But not all the responses were positive. Some people criticized Victoria for inserting herself into a grieving family. Others questioned whether the girls were too young to make such a significant decision. A few suggested that Daniel had remarried too quickly, that he should have waited longer out of respect for Amanda. The girls saw those comments too. "Don't read those," Victoria said when she found Ivy scrolling through online responses late one night. "People who don't know us don't get to define us. But they're saying mean things about you." About Daddy. About all of us. Victoria sat down beside her. Do you remember what you wrote in your essay? That the bravest thing you ever did was ask for help even when you were scared people would say no. Yes. Well, this is the same thing. We were brave enough to share our story, even though we knew some people wouldn't understand. But we didn't do it for them. We did it for the people who needed to hear that healing is possible, that love isn't limited, that families can be built in all kinds of ways. Ivy leaned against her. I'm glad you said yes that night. Me too, sweetheart. Me too. 7 years after that first birthday dinner, on a crisp autumn evening, Daniel came home to find Victoria sitting on the porch with an envelope in her hands. What's that? He asked. It came in the mail today. No return address. She held it out to him. Inside was a letter written in shaky handwriting. Dear Heart family, you don't know me, but I was in the restaurant that night 8 years ago. I was the elderly woman sitting 2 tables over. I watched 3 little girls approach a stranger and ask her to be their mother, and I watched that stranger say yes. I was having dinner alone that night because my daughter had just told me she didn't want me in her life anymore. We'd had a falling out years before, and I'd been too proud to apologize. But watching your family that night, seeing how you chose connection over pride, it gave me the courage to reach out to her. It took time, but we've reconciled. I'm writing to say thank you. Your bravery that night changed more lives than just your own. With gratitude, Margaret Chen. Victoria and Daniel looked at each other, both with tears in their eyes. We were being watched, Victoria said softly, and we didn't even know we were doing anything worth watching. We were just trying to survive a hard day. That's exactly what makes it matter. We weren't performing for an audience. We were just being human, messy and scared and brave all at once. Daniel pulled her close. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd said no that night? Every day. Not because I regret saying yes, but because I'm so grateful I didn't let fear win. Victoria looked up at him. What about you? Do you wonder what would have happened if you'd said no? Sometimes. But then I look at our life, at the girls, at you, at this family we've built, and I realize that saying yes was the easiest decision I've ever made. Even though it was terrifying. Especially because it was terrifying. The best things in life usually are. They sat there on the porch as the sun set, holding hands, both thinking about how one moment of courage had rippled outward in ways they could never have imagined. The girls had taught them that asking for help isn't weakness. That saying yes to strangers can change everything. That love doesn't subtract, it multiplies. And somewhere in a city neither of them had ever visited, an elderly woman named Margaret was having dinner with her daughter for the first time in years, telling her about 3 little girls in a restaurant who'd reminded her what bravery looked like. The ripples kept spreading in ways they'd never know. But that was okay, because the best kind of courage doesn't need an audience. It just needs 3 little girls brave enough to ask, and 1 woman brave enough to say yes. 8 years after that first birthday dinner, Daniel woke up to the sound of rain and knew immediately what day it was. 8 years after that first birthday dinner, Daniel woke up to the sound of rain and knew immediately what day it was. His birthday. But this time he didn't dread it. This time, he rolled over to find Victoria already awake, watching him with a soft smile. Happy birthday, she whispered. Thank you. The girls have plans for you today. Fair warning. Should I be worried? Probably. At breakfast, the girls, now 14 and impossibly grown up, presented him with cards they'd made. Ivy's card had a drawing of a restaurant table with 5 chairs. For the family we became. Ruby's showed a birthday cake with candles. For the wishes that came true. Pearl's was covered in hearts. For choosing to love again. Daniel couldn't speak. Could only pull all 3 girls into a hug and hold on tight. That evening, they went back to the same restaurant. Daniel didn't even have to suggest it. The girls had made the reservation themselves. They sat at a table for 5 this time, and when the waiter brought the birthday cake, Daniel looked around at his family. Amanda's girls, who'd grown into young women who'd never forgotten their first mother, but had learned to love their second one just as fiercely. Victoria, who'd said yes to 3 scared children and found the family she'd been meant for all along. And himself, a man who thought his story ended with loss, but had learned that endings were sometimes just beginnings in disguise. "Make a wish, Daddy," Ivy said, just like she had 8 years ago. But Daniel shook his head. "I don't need to wish for anything. I have everything I could ever want right here." "Make one anyway," Ruby insisted. "For luck," Pearl added. So Daniel closed his eyes and made a wish, not for himself, but for everyone who'd ever sat alone on their birthday, wondering if the pain would ever ease. He wished for them what 3 little girls had given him: the courage to let someone in, the bravery to say yes to connection even when it scared them, the wisdom to understand that new love doesn't erase old love. It just proves that the heart is bigger than we think it is. And as he opened his eyes and saw his family smiling at him across the candlelight, Daniel knew that sometimes the best birthday wishes were the ones that already came true, because 8 years ago he'd been alone, and 3 brave little girls had changed everything. If this story touched your heart the way it touched mine, please don't let it end here. Let it remind you that loneliness is a choice, not a sentence. That asking for help is brave. That saying yes to connection, even from strangers, can change everything. Subscribe and be part of our Heart Echo Stories family, where every story lifts the spirit and reminds us that the heart is always big enough for both grief and joy, for remembering and moving forward, for holding on to the past while embracing the future. And if this moment moved you, share it, because sometimes sharing hope is the kindest thing we can do.